You're listening to the September 25th, 2015 edition of the Cybercrime and Business Podcast, the weekly podcast that's focused exclusively on how the world of cybercrime is impacting business. On this episode, we have an interview with Jerome Segura. He's the senior security researcher at Malwarebytes, and we talk about malvertising and how it's impacting ad networks and content providers. Hello, I am Jeff Peters, Surfwatch Labs editor, and I'm here with Matt Leifus, Surfwatch Labs writer. This podcast is brought to you by Surfwatch Labs. A little bit later, we'll be having that interview on malvertising, but first we're going to recap the week's top trending cybercrime events, advisories, and legal actions. So to get started, I will throw it over to you, Matt, as always, for the top cybercrime events from the past week.
Surfwatch Labs collected data on 111 industry targets negatively associated with cybercrime over the past week, and another 227 being discussed on the dark web. From that data, we come up with our top trending industry targets for the week. Coming in at number 3, we have Salt Lake County, Utah. Employees of Salt Lake County, Utah had their information exposed in a data breach that lasted for several months over the summer. Salt Lake County employees who filed workers' compensation or third-party claims on the internet during June 18th and September 19th are potentially at risk. The data breach occurred during a scheduled upgrade to the county's networks by a third-party vendor called Sistema Software. This is a company that provides workers' compensation, property, and auto insurance for clients in Utah, Kansas, and California. According to an article from Modern Healthcare, 1.5 million records have been exposed in those 3 states that were also serviced from this Sistema software. Information potentially exposed in this data breach includes social security numbers and medical information. Pertaining just to Salt Lake County, Utah, there's been reports that 29,000 individuals were affected by the breach. The mayor's office is saying that's incorrect, and they have said that they only employ about 3,000 individuals, so that's kind of their base for why they're saying it's incorrect. Coming in number 2, we have Philippines National Telecommunications Commission. The website for the Philippines NTC was recently hacked by the hacktivist group Anonymous. The hackers left a long message on the website asking for, quote, fairness in charging and serving our data services. The attack took place last Sunday. Last May, just to give a little reason what they're talking about, what Anonymous is talking about with this hack, it was reported last May that the Philippines had the second slowest download speed in Asia, according to the Ookla Household Download Index. So they're kind of asking for like, hey, we're paying this money. Why is our service so slow? So they defaced the webpage. And coming in at number 1, and I'm sure everyone here, judging from our data, has heard about this, we're going to talk about Xcode Ghost in Apple apps. A malware called Xcode Ghost was discovered in hundreds of iPhone and iPad applications. Initial findings said only about 40 applications were affected with the malware. However, after FireEye did their own investigation, they found more than 4,000 infected apps on the App Store. The discovery of this malware initially sounded very serious for Apple. However, upon further investigation into Xcode Ghost, it was found the malware acts more like an adware. It doesn't have the capability to steal user information from a device where it is installed. Only basic information about the device is collected. That being said, the information that is collected can be used to attack users in other ways. So those are the top trending industry targets. And we ended there, talking about Apple. So Jeff, when we were kind of going over the podcast, get ready what we want to talk about, didn't you want to bring up something about the Apple Store?
I'm on Twitter usually a lot throughout the day, just kind of following different stories. And this seemed to be the one that just was blowing up my Twitter feed everyone was talking about. Like you said, it's not necessarily a super severe attack in what's happening. But a lot of people are saying it is the biggest hack ever involving, the Apple Store. Just to back up and explain real quick what happened is there's this Xcode software that's used to develop all App Store apps. And the issue is that people in China, it takes a long time to download this software. I think it's like 3 gigabytes. So in the US, it takes about like 25 minutes or so, they were saying. But there's some reports of it taking up to 3 hours to download this code in China. So this is just one of the many problems going on in China and the reason you get a lot of piracy and jailbroken devices and things like that over there. So instead, what happens is a lot of people download the file from file sharing sites. So attackers took advantage of this, knowing that people are going to download it from file sharing sites instead of from the official source, and they modified the version and added in some malicious code. So it really is kind of a clever way of doing an attack, and that's kind of, I think, what's the interesting part about this.
Didn't the idea from this attack actually come from the CIA?
There was a report from The Intercept in March 2015 that noted that documents leaked by Edward Snowden claim that CIA researchers detailed a way to manipulate Xcode in order to inject malware into apps without the developer knowing. So basically very similar to this attack that everyone's been talking about this week. So this was leaked with the Snowden documents and reported on. And Ryan Olson, he's the director of threat intelligence for Unit 42 at Palo Alto Networks. He just pointed out the timing of these attacks. He said that this report came out on March 10th, 2015, and then the first upload of the malicious Xcode packages happened on March 23rd, 2015. So not that the CIA is connected to this attack, but he just believes that the attackers likely inspired by the idea. So just wrapping up this story, Phil Schiller, he works at Apple. I think he does marketing there. He said that the firm would offer domestic downloads in China in a bid to speed up downloads. So that way they can hopefully convince people to only use the official software instead of this pirated stuff on file sharing sites. And then he also said that customers who have downloaded these malicious apps that may have been compromised, they will receive more information letting them know if that happened. Olson, he also said, that this is a wake-up call for developers and that he hopes that developers look at this and make sure that the devices they're developing on are more secure. And then he also said that he certainly expects there to be other attacks, perhaps leveraging some of these similar methods, trying to get into the App Store or other types of attacks using similar methods.
One thing, and we talk about this a lot, and I think we pointed this out last podcast, one of the words or countries you talked about was China. And so, like we said last week, let's talk about China again, because they always seem to be in the news. This week, if anyone hasn't heard, the Chinese president is going to be in the country, going across the U.S. He actually has a White House state dinner planned for tomorrow. One of the things that I wanted to talk about real quick was the Chinese president's response. Obviously, we were talking about China really just going to town hacking us. They probably hack other people too, but we're focusing on their hacks against the United States. I want to talk about what the Chinese president, his response to some of this. And he came out and said that China's not hacking people, is what he said, and pointed out the legalities of cybercrime and hacking, saying that cyber criminals should be punished and, people should be held accountable for their crimes. And he also came out and says China and the U.S. have common concerns on cybersecurity and that China is ready to move forward with strengthening with the U.S. side of the issue. In his statement, he's kind of saying that, we kind of agree that the U.S. should go after that, but what else is he supposed to say?
Yeah, I don't think they're ever going to come out and admit it, just as the U.S. doesn't admit a lot of that stuff either.
Yeah, because the U.S. is completely innocent in all of our activities as well.
Yeah, there's been a lot of chatter that I've seen this week around this meeting, and a lot of people are saying that a deal is definitely going to be struck. It seems to be the consensus from all the stuff I read the last couple of days. But a lot of the articles, the headlines like, oh, yes, there's going to be a deal, but it's not going to matter. And, a lot of people are pontificating about what's going to happen and, what the impacts are going to be before anything's actually happened. So coming into this podcast, I was thinking, man, it seems like every week we're talking about China. And I was like, this week we're not going to talk about China. But every story seems to relate to China. We have all this political stuff going on. And then just this week at the same time, there was another report released on Chinese espionage. I believe it was by Threat Connect and the Defense Group. They detailed how this group of Chinese hackers are sending email attachments with malicious software embedded in this campaign called Project Camera Shy. In the press release, they said, quote, "It documents Chinese efforts to gain the upper hand in a geopolitical standoff by capturing information on regional rivals, negotiating postures, economic and military capabilities." And it's been going on, I think, for about 5 years. So Despite what all the political leaders are saying, everyone keeps releasing these reports saying China, China, China all the time.
Speaking of, China, let's go a little back in time. Now, a lot of times when we end a discussion, we'll say something like, there's probably going to be more on this issue. Well, let's get back to the Office of Personnel Management breach.
The breach that never ends.
Yeah, the breach never ends. There's more on this issue, and guess who it involves? China, of course. This new piece of information involves the amount of fingerprint records that were stolen. The number of fingerprint records stolen in the Office of Personnel Management breach has risen from a previously reported 1.1 million to 5.6 million, much like how the number of people that were originally affected kept rising and whatever else. The announcement came after further investigation revealed archived records containing additional fingerprint data not previously analyzed. OPM said that a working group with expertise in this area will review the potential ways adversaries could misuse fingerprint data, adding, quote, if in the future new means are developed to misuse the fingerprint data, the government will provide additional information to individuals whose fingerprints may have been stolen in this breach.
I thought it was funny reading the story in that, no matter what happens in a breach, I saw people tweeting about this and just making fun of it. Everyone always says, it's a sophisticated cyber attack. And they always say, but credit card information wasn't stolen. And here they got everything. They got fingerprint data, and the government saying, they're kind of downplaying, the fingerprint data. It's like, no matter what they steal, if they steal credit card data, it's like, they didn't get your social security numbers. If they steal everything else, it's, they didn't get your credit card number. It's like, everyone just tries to spin it and downplay it.
Yeah, they have everything else on you, but they didn't get that data, so it's not as big a deal as it sounds.
Yeah. Oh, man. That was really the big story that everyone's been talking about. Everyone's been talking about Apple and China, and I assume people are going to be talking a lot about China next week, too, as we see if some kind of deal does get made. But there was some other advisories and stuff that came out. So moving on, we'll run down a few of the cybercrime advisories that were trending in our data the past week. So there was this Imager vulnerability that made a lot of news. There's a vulnerability in the code of this popular image sharing website, and that made it possible to inject malicious code into an image link. According to Imager, it appears that the exploit was targeted specifically to users of 4chan and 8chan via images shared via a specific subreddit on reddit.com. So they were sharing these images and they had malicious code, and it was basically causing a DDoS attack on these sites. The vulnerability has been patched now and everything's fixed. But yeah, if you were one on Reddit or anything this week, a lot of people were talking about that. And then another advisory that I just saw recently was the website realtor.com was hit with a malvertising attack. Jerome Segura, he actually just wrote a blog post a couple days ago. We actually interviewed him before this blog post came out about malvertising for the interview later. So he wrote a blog about this malvertising attack on realtor.com. Basically, the real estate website and its ad-serving platform, AdSpirit, exposed visitors to this malvertising campaign that may have infected users' computers. And the interesting thing about malvertising, which we talk about in the interview coming up, is that users don't even need to click to be infected. If their system's outdated or unpatched, they can be infected just by simply visiting a website like realtor.com. And as always, these malvertising campaigns are serving Angler Exploit Kit, which seems to be the go-to exploit kit for cyber criminals. But just to put in perspective the potential damage that went on over this couple-day period, Realtor.com has an estimated 28 million monthly visitors. So this is just the latest in a string of malvertising attacks that we talk about every week.
Yeah, it seems like we've been talking about that a lot recently, a lot of malvertising attacks.
Yeah, and that's a crazy thing, too, is that you don't really necessarily need to do anything in order to get infected. I don't know about you, but I got a lot of family and friends who I'm sure don't have their browsers updated and everything, their Flash player updated, religiously. I could easily see someone getting infected with a ransomware or some other type of malware just by browsing around on the internet.
This week, Surfwatch Labs posted an alert having to do with a malicious Cisco router backdoor implant that was discovered. A backdoor malware dubbed Sinful Knock modifies Cisco system routers' firmware image and provides unrestricted access using a secret backdoor password. Infections have affected at least 79 devices in 19 countries, and FireEye found Sinful Knock on 14 servers in India, Mexico, Ukraine, and the Philippines. Organizations should re-image affected routers with the newest Cisco download available and create new and non-default credentials to prevent a future compromise.
Yeah, so moving on real quick, we'll highlight some of the legal action that took place. All sorts of fines and settlements and lawsuits and stuff going on as always. It seems like there's more and more each week. Probably the biggest one, the biggest settlement that took place, Comcast agreed to pay $33 million for a data breach. They settled with California authorities over this breach that occurred from 2010 to 2012. The money, that $33 million, is going to go to customers affected by the breach as well as state agencies. In that breach, a total of 75,000 people had their names, phone numbers, and addresses compromised. Then another settlement that was approved this week, LinkedIn. If you guys remember back in 2012, there was this whole ordeal where hackers gained access to their servers and stole and posted passwords of 6.4 million users. So there ended up being this class action lawsuit that's been going on the past couple of years. And they finally, a federal judge this week approved a $1.25 million settlement. So LinkedIn is going to pay 50,000 users. They're not paying the whole 6.4 million, but just the 50,000 users who had purchased premium memberships, they're going to get $15. So good for you. And then that just always cracks me up. It's like,
I know, right? I know.
But then the company also has agreed that they're going to salt and hash their passwords going forward. I believe they weren't encrypted or anything, if I remember correctly. Those 6.4 million that were stolen. So yeah, a few settlements going on.
We also had a lawsuit coming up. AT&T is suing some of their former employees for installing malware. 3 former employees of AT&T are being sued by the company for allegedly installing malware on AT&T's networks in an effort to unlock devices illegally. There are 3 individuals named in the lawsuit. The company says the 3 former employees used malware to process hundreds of thousands of unlock requests through the AT&T network. The lawsuit also says other services and developers were involved, that they were not named in the lawsuit at this time. Last week we were talking about a huge breach involving Excelis, Blue Cross, and Blue Shield. Well, they're going to face a potential class action lawsuit, or I should say that a group of people have filed for class action status. This class action lawsuit is stemming from the data breach that compromised the personal information of more than 10 million people. The complaint was filed by 3 individuals. The complainants seek nationwide and New York class status. It is still yet to be determined what the complainants are seeking for damages and rewards.
Yeah, and there's a couple of more legal stories and fines as well. Just a reminder that if you have a cybercrime event hit you, you're probably going to be in the news for all sorts of legal stuff as well. The SEC has fined RT Jones Capital Equities Management. They levied this fine against the St. Louis-based firm for failing to protect its clients during a July 2013 cyber attack, which was traced to China. Of course. The SEC said that RT Jones Capital's Equities Management did not have the necessary protections in place, leading to a data breach that compromised the data of nearly 100,000 people. And the fine was $75,000.
That was an awful lot of buildup. I was expecting a bigger number.
Well, it's all relative, though, depending on the size of a company. 75,000. I guess I don't really know how big this capital equities management company is, but
that's
75,000 for a small company is quite significant.
That's
probably
true.
Not so much for a company like Apple. And then finally, on the legal side, we have a federal court has found a former immigration minister guilty. Scott Morrison is said to have given orders for his department to, quote, set up a process guaranteed to fail for handling a major data breach that disclosed the personal details of almost 10,000 asylum seekers.
Nice guy.
The names, birth dates, and nationalities of the 10,000 asylum seekers were all leaked on the Immigration Department's website. Due to court findings, the Immigration Department will more than likely have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in compensation to the victims. So quite a week there in terms of some of the legal stuff. And there was also quite a few other arrests and stuff as always. Before we get to our interview with Jerome Segura, we have our funny story of the week brought to you by Matt.
Another thing that we talk about quite a bit it's become the poster child for, especially with point of sale data breaches, and that's Target. Verizon was doing an investigation on Target, and Brian Krebs wrote an article earlier this week that kind of summed up the investigation. And I'm getting to the funny part, guys. Hold on. I just want to read a quote from Krebs' article on Krebs on Security. The Verizon assessment conducted between December 21st, 2013 to March 1st, 2014 notably found no controls limiting their access to any system, including devices within stores such as point of sales, registers, and servers. The report noted that Verizon consultants were able to directly communicate with point-of-sale registers and servers from the core network. In one instance, they were able to communicate directly with cash registers and checkout lanes after compromising a deli meat scale located in a different store.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah, you heard us. You heard me. A deli meat scale. Hackers could have potentially compromised deli meat scales to communicate with Target's point-of-sale networks. So guys out there, if you're listening, Jeff and I have let you down. Okay, we spent all this time talking about updating your all your programs and educating yourself on cybersecurity threats and best practices, but we neglected to tell you that your meat scale could be really what's putting you at risk. So we apologize. What did you think when were you expecting to see that in that article? A deli meat scale having anything to do with that?
I didn't even know Target sold deli meat. At least they don't around here.
I don't think our store. Well, to be honest, I've never gone to Target for the purpose of buying anything like that. But yeah, I've never seen it either.
Yeah, just one more reason not to eat meat. Bad for your health, and might also be bad for your cybersecurity.
Yeah.
All right, now coming up, we have our interview with Jerome Segura, the senior security researcher at Malwarebytes. According to a recent report I saw, Q1 2015 saw digital internet ad revenue hit $13.3 billion. So that's just something to keep in mind as we talk about all these malvertising threats each week, and in this interview coming up, is that it's definitely a big problem that affects a lot of potential money. My first question is, it seems to me that malvertising has really grown over the past year or so, and that we're seeing a lot more of these instances of these highly trafficked websites serving malicious ads. Just wondering if you agree with my perception about that?
It's true. I mean, there's a trend of growth of malvertising in the past few years, but especially this past year. And the truth of the matter is that millions of people, you and I included, are being exposed to malware through malvertising. So ads that are malicious in nature, that are posted by rogue advertisers on top publishers. We're talking about a lot of mainstream sites. Basically, these ads, when you open those pages and you read news articles, these ads automatically download malicious code onto your computer, and you don't have to even click on them. It happens automatically in the background, and within a few seconds, you become infected with one or multiple pieces of malware.
You recently published a blog for Malwarebytes, basically describing another malvertising campaign. It seems like every week I read a new one on your guys' sites, but this one affected websites like eBay, The Drudge Report, Answers.com, etc. But you wrote that the malicious actors behind these campaigns have used several new tricks to fly under the radar. Just wondering if you could explain how these actors are going about doing these campaigns.
Malvertising started very. The first few attacks were very basic. They were ads that were booby-trapped and essentially were redirecting your browser to a malicious site and then exploiting you. As things progressed and there's been more scrutiny. On the defensive side, there have been new measures to combat this problem and be more proactive, which have forced the threat actors behind malvertising to come up with new techniques and essentially make the delivery of malvertising very stealthy. That's the whole goal. They're trying to have those campaigns going on that nobody hears about or complains about, and yet that are still have a very large impact. So what we've seen is the sophistication of those attacks has increased dramatically. And some of the techniques, both from a technical point of view where those redirections are well hidden, there are multiple evasion techniques to avoid crawlers, avoid security products, but also on the more human aspect of, social engineering, posing as legitimate advertisers and actually trying to, have front ends that look completely fine. That's something new. We're seeing these real companies that have websites that appear to have been there for a long time, with even email contacts for support and actual products to download. This is just a facade that these guys have been able to put to create this online persona for those companies that actually don't exist. And that's been able to fool a lot of the ad networks into trusting them. And then, once they're being trusted, they're able to perform those campaigns. And again, when they're able to match the social engineering aspect with the technical stuff, we're seeing, for example, a lot more encryption in the ad delivery. So a lot of ads are now being served through HTTPS. HTTPS is a great thing for the internet overall, but when it's being misused in those cases, it actually makes our job, as security researchers, and even the jobs of ad networks and companies that screen ads much more difficult, because the transaction happens between people, the browser, and the ad server, and it's completely encrypted. So you can't really see what's happening. You know that there's an ad call, but what exactly is happening during that ad call and the response. And that's something we saw in the latest campaign, where you could scan the ads multiple times. They're always clean, but within the communication between the browser and the server for the advertiser, there were these extra connections that were delivering, malicious payload that nobody really saw. So, overall complexity in the techniques that are delivered now has made the whole malvertising issue bigger. And as I said, it's something that affects all publishers. There's no discrimination in even, all ad networks. So it really shows that malvertising isn't just a problem that affects particular types of sites or publishers or ad networks. It's really a global problem, and everybody can be concerned.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's kind of a difficult problem to stop. For example, if you're a business, a lot of them are using these ad networks. Is there anything that they can do or should be doing to try to prevent their customers from falling victim to these malvertising attacks?
To a publisher, obviously the kind of contracts you have with ad networks, and advertising is a big part of a company's revenue, so it's really important. I think you got to look at those type of contracts and agreements you have with ad networks. Not all things are similar. For example, certain ad networks are much more, liberal in terms of what type of advertisers they allow on their own network, which obviously is a big problem. And, whereas other major ad networks tend to be much tighter and have stronger guidelines. So typically you want to deal with those that have already an established reputation and are bigger. But at the same time, it doesn't necessarily mean that malvertising is not going to happen. It affects everybody. But having said that, an important thing is the degree of reactivity when the problem is spotted, how fast are these ad networks being able to contain it and address it. That's really something that's important as well, because that window of opportunity for criminals is really important, in terms of how fast can I roll out a malicious campaign and how many innocent victims can I get. They know the time is very limited, so they have to be as quick as possible. So by, limiting that time window, you also limit the number of people that are potentially exposed.
I'm wondering if it's the same malicious actors. Is it the same group of people that's doing these attacks again and again, or is it a variety of people? I don't know if you have a sense of that at all.
There's, there are multiple actors, but really malvertising is simply a way to distribute malware, just like spam with, for example, malicious links, or let's say hacking legitimate websites and performing redirections on those sites. So it's one way that has proven to be extremely effective. And so I think, various groups of criminals, ranging from those that leverage exploit kits to distribute malware to scammers that, essentially will give you malware but will pop various scams and fake surveys or tech support scams on your screen. They're basically all leveraging the same concept of getting traffic from sites that have a lot of visitors and then redirecting the traffic to their product, to their payload. Things are a little different in terms of the type of payload. We've seen ransomware, we've seen ad fraud type of payload, we've seen the scams as well. They range differently in terms of degree of severity, but some of the major groups that we have observed behind those malvertising campaigns were working very closely with operators of the Angler exploit kit. And Angler is the top exploit kit at the moment. It's one that is able to leverage the latest vulnerabilities. All through the year, it's been very quick at getting even 0 days, which are unpatched vulnerabilities, into the kit. So it's the top exploit kit, the best cyber weapon, if you will, to infect people. According to a Cisco report, it has a 40% chance of infecting any user that lands on the actual exploit kit page. So a pretty good return on investment. So we've seen in those two big malvertising campaigns, we've seen these gang pushing the Angler exploit kit and then loading a mix of ransomware, so CryptoWall, Tesla Crypt, ransomware that can be devastating to businesses or consumers. Even more so businesses, because let's say you have an employee on their lunch break that just surfing Yahoo.com or Huffington Post, they get hit by malvertising. If the computer was vulnerable, which, believe it or not, it's something that's very frequent in the enterprise world. It only takes missing a Windows update or not patching Flash player right in time, and you can be vulnerable. And within a matter of seconds, the computer is basically encrypted. All the data is completely encrypted, and not only that, but in an enterprise setting, the type of malware that it is will try and replicate and spread over to other parts of the company, other networks of the computers, which, if you don't have a good backup, could really cripple your business. So it's a risk that has to be taken very seriously. There are things that users can do. I think it's, we're looking at different aspects of the problem, from the publishers having good deals with their ad networks, the ad networks themselves doing proper screening, doing stronger policies on, new advertisers, but, also end users themselves, because the ads are the vehicle to the malware, but the ads themselves are not the problem. The problem is those computers that are not patched and that are getting infected. So it's really important for users to remember to patch those computers. That drastically reduces your risk to malvertising and drive-by download infections. But on top of that, you have to apply multiple layers of security. And one especially important when it comes to exploit kits is tools that prevent exploitation. So anti-exploit tool mitigation, for example, the traditional protections such as antivirus and, of course, anti-malware. If you're taking all these steps, you really reduce your risk of being infected, which in turn makes it less opportunity for criminals to invest money into malvertising if they see that computers are getting patched. But that's not the case at the moment. At the moment, they get about a 40% return on investment per user that lands on the exploit page. So it's just for them, it's too big of an incentive to keep going at it.
You mentioned that a user doesn't even have to click on or interact with the ad, and I guess that's one of the big questions a lot of people ask, or one of the things that they're surprised about, that everyone assumes that they have to click or do something. So just wondering if you could maybe briefly explain how that works.
Sure. The way advertising works right now is, which has changed over the past few years, is through a technique called real-time bidding. So when you're loading your browser and you're surfing sites, when you land on a page, there'll be scripts on that page that will check your browser for, what version of operating system you have, what browser, your IP address for geolocation. It'll check your cookies to kind of get an idea of the profile, your profile. And that's to serve you the best ad that matches your profile. And this is done in real time. So, it's a process that happens really quickly in a few milliseconds through real-time bidding. And at the end of the chain, what you have is through the ad networks, you have various advertisers that upload and submit their creatives, which are the ads themselves, and are bidding for a particular spot on a particular website based on all sorts of criteria, for example, demographic, sexual interest in, let's say, cars or things like that. And so they bid and submit the ad, and if they win the ad, then the ad gets displayed in your browser in real time. So as you're looking at the page, that ad that happens to be malicious or has been submitted by a malicious actor performs a violent redirection. So within the same context of the same page, the ad calls an external site, which, as we've seen recently, often leads to multiple other hops in a long chain to kind of defeat security scanners. But it happens so quickly, they all kind of, there's like a snowball effect where it's, you go from one link to the next. But the ultimate goal is, to redirect your browser to that expert kit landing page. But from a user standpoint, you're still looking at the same news article or recipe. You haven't left it. It's only been a couple of seconds, and malicious code has been loaded into your browser in the background without any interaction on your part. And what it does is basically fingerprints your system. It looks if you have what type of browser you have, if you have Flash Player installed or Java, things like that. And based on your system, it will push the relevant exploits. So what we've seen a lot recently were Internet Explorer and Flash Player exploits. Those are the most prevalent. So push those. And if your computer has not been patched and your system is vulnerable, the exploit will trigger a download of actual malware. So again, the exploit kit's part of that chain of malvertising to compromise your system, to pry it open so that malware can be downloaded and then run, again, without your knowledge or acceptance. That's why we call it drive-by download, because you're just browsing the web. You're not even going on, shady sites, not clicking on anything particular, but you have the ads there that are loading this. Part of this problem, I think, there's been a lot of discussions on malvertising and ads and ad blockers in particular. And, a lot of people say, well, use ad blockers to prevent malvertising. But personally, I think it's a little short-sighted and can have, severe consequences overall for, not just advertisers, but also publishers who depend on revenue from the ads themselves. And that's a problem. I think we're at a crossroad right now where there's so many people using ad blockers because of, malvertising and sometimes sites that serve more ads than actual content, that it's really putting everything into perspective. And really, publishers are at a point where, they have to be able, the ad industry itself, have to be able to find new ways to deliver content and ads together so that, everybody gets paid for and people can still enjoy content for free, in a manner that does not put anybody at risk. But at the end of the day, I still think that the ads themselves are not really the problem. I think the problem is the vulnerabilities and people using computers that are not patched. That's the problem. So at the end of the day, that's really what we should focus on, I think.
And that wraps up this week's episode of the Cybercrime and Business Podcast. As always, the Cybercrime and Business Podcast is brought to you by Surfwatch Labs. Surfwatch Labs delivers cyber risk intelligence solutions that help organizations understand the potential for cyber attacks, determine the impact to their business, and proactively address threats head-on. You can follow this podcast on iTunes, YouTube, and all the major podcasting sites. And for more information on Surfwatch Labs cyber risk intelligence, check out surfwatchlabs.com.